My name is Kyle Kunnecke. I'm the General Manager of Makers Mercantile. We are here to talk about locked float. Yeah, see, I did it again. So much for rehearsal, right? We are here to talk about joining yarns, 4 different ways of joining yarns. And I'm so happy to see so many people coming in. People are still coming in, which is fun. So the 4 ways we're going to talk about a braided join, spit splicing or wet splicing, the Russian join, and the magic knot. So let me click one thing real quick and we will be ready to dive in. Okay. So I mentioned just a moment ago, for those of you who are just now joining us, you don't need to take notes. We have a series of handouts that we're going to be making available. So you will watch for those shortly. And if this is the recording, hello, they probably are available. So the first one I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the Russian join. So the Russian join, I'm going to be using a yarn called Kensington. It's by Haiku. It is a really lovely yarn. And I'm going to go to my second camera here and show you what it looks like. So there it is. It's a little scrappy yarn, but this is a fantastic sort of a chainette yarn. And of course I pulled the red, not the greatest one to show, but you can kind of see how this looks. So what we're going to do is use a tapestry needle. So this happens to be one of our finishing needles. They are made by Addie. And I'm just going to, so I'm doing this sort of off camera and on camera. So my little tiny picture over here, hi, I'm threading the needle here. So I will do that. I know that this camera is a little skippy, but we will just move very slowly. So I want you to see. So the first thing that you need to do is just thread the needle. This would have been like the end, either the end of the yarn that you've just finished using, or it would be the yarn that you're about to use. And right onto the same yarn. So the tail is right here. I don't want it to fall off of my needle. But what I'm going to do is just sort of stab into this yarn sort of back and forth, and I want to engage the fibers as many times as I possibly can, and I want to do this for quite a length of space. So the Russian join is really, really good for yarns that can't be spit spliced or wet spliced, for yarns that don't felt, for example. They're good cellulose fibers, things that are superwash. If you see something that is superwash, that means that those little, the sticky bits of the felt have been, or of the wool have been stripped away. And that means that it doesn't felt, it doesn't, grab onto itself and felt. So I'm just working back and forth on here, and it doesn't take very long. Ideally, it would be, a sharp-ish needle, but I'm working with a larger needle here. And I don't want to just go right up the tube of this, since this is a, there you go. So I've sort of stabbed all the way back and forth through this yarn, and I'm keeping hold of this end. I don't want to lose that. I am going to pull all of this material. I'm going to pull this needle through all of that material, but I don't, you see this loop right here? I don't want to lose that loop. So I'm going to stick my fingers right here and sort of work the bit off of there. There it goes, in one big swoop. So off comes the thing, and it's sort of locked onto itself with that little hole there. Easy. Can't really see the hole. There's the hole. Little tiny hole. So that's going to be important in just a second. I'm going to repeat the same thing. So I'm threading a different color, and I'm using 2 different colors here because I want to make sure that you can see what I'm doing. So I just threaded the second yarn. So if this one went to my project, the other would be my new ball. And I'm putting my needle through that little hole that I just created. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So this is the Russian join for those of you who are just showing up. I'll let Marsha in here. She wants in too. So I've joined the first one in the same method. I'm doing exactly the same thing. And I want to make sure that this little loop of that I just went through is between wherever I start stabbing through the yarn and the eye of the needle. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did a few minutes ago. Just back and forth and back and forth. This, the cons, not like maybe not the greatest parts about this would be requires a tapestry needle. Of course, like you got to stop and find your tapestry needle, which is probably well, it is certainly somewhere, and usually it's fairly available. It does create a little bit of a thicker yarn right at the join, and sometimes that can be visible. It also, in a few minutes, you're going to see it creates a distinct change in color between the two yarns if you're changing color of yarn. And it takes time. It takes a little more time. So here I am. So I've stabbed up through this, and I'm going to do the same thing I did before, just taking care not to lose this little spot here. I'm going to pull this tail up through this, all the parts that I've stabbed through the needle. So I'll work that all the way down, and there it goes. So there's most of the join. You see that big loop there? So this loop that's right here, you can tighten this up by pulling on the different ends. So you just work, not as easy to demonstrate by showing you on the camera, but you take the little yarn tail end and sort of pull, 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 and you can squish it down and it will reorient the yarn so that that little loop is gone and the tail is there, right? So here we'll do the same thing on this side. Find the tail and squish down just a pinch on these pieces and then pull up on this bit. And I'm just cinching up that little hole right there. So that is what the Russian join looks like. Pretty cool. So then you would trim this little these little yarn tails, and you can trim them flush right now and then just go ahead and knit with it. And in the PDFs that you'll get, it'll say go ahead and trim them. I would just wait. Go ahead and knit, or crochet or whatever it is that you're doing, work with your project, and then after you're done blocking, then you can trim that flat. Kind of cool, makes sense. All right, so that is the Russian join. Next, we will let's do the magic knot. Magic knot. Oh, I don't need this needle anymore. You'll stab him over here. So the magic knot, the yarn I'm going to use is called Albino. Here is a little bit of Albino. It is, I believe, 95% wool and like 5% linen. And Karin, jump in and tell me if I'm wrong. But Albino, I believe that's what it is. It's got just a touch of linen, and you can see it in there. It's little tiny bits, and I think it's really pretty. So
it is 15% linen, Kyle.
15% linen.
15% linen.
I was close, kind of.
Yep.
At least I was not close at all. So this is called the magic knot. The magic knot is really good for, this is not really a novelty yarn, but it's really good for novelty yarns. So the first thing you want to do is lay one of the yarns in this sort of like an L that fell over onto its back. And you're going to do the exact same thing with the, I've got to get a little closer here. Let's see. And then turn it. Okay. So we'll pretend this is going to my ball of yarn. Here's yarn. We'll pretend it's there. So now that when you lay them in that order, it gets the, this tail is on top of the yarn that's heading to your project. And this tail is under the yarn that's heading to the new ball of yarn. So you see they're sort of woven over each other. So now you just take this end here and sneak it under and tie a little knot. And it's just a simple knot like that. And just tighten it up, but you don't want to pull it tight. You don't want to like strangle it or anything. And then this way, you're going to do pretty much the same thing. You just cross it over. And I know my hands are a little bit in the way, but and you tie another little knot. And again, don't tighten it up so much that it's gonna, not move, because here comes the magic part. Everyone ready? So you pull on the two ends and the two knots squish together, and there they are. They are knotted together. This doesn't come apart. That's the magic knot. What's great about a magic knot? I'm gonna unshare that for a second and talk to you with my face. Here's my face. Some of the things that are not great about it, knots in general, people will say knots are not awesome in your knitting. There are some designers who are amazing and wonderful, like Kate Fassett. He ties knots in his work. So if you want to tie knots in your work, go ahead and do it. It's totally fine. This is really good for very fine yarns. It's good for, like I said, novelty yarns. And it's ideal if the pattern that you're doing is a textured pattern, like seed stitch or moss stitch or something like that. Not necessarily the best if you're doing stockinette, because at least half the time, the little knot's going to sneak through to the front, right? And you don't want to see the knot because there it is. You can trim the ends very short, but again, I would go ahead and just work the ends in and weave. I would actually weave them in. So it is super secure. It's not going to come apart. But if you trim those ends super short, which you can, and then you complete your entire project, and then some time goes by, and somehow that little knot works its way apart, which doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's a terrible thing. If you trimmed those yarn tails super flat, you have no yarn there to sort of try to repair that piece, right? So I would encourage you, if you use the magic knot, to go ahead and leave those yarn tails, work them into your project, weave them in as you're done. Go ahead and block your project like normal, and then trim the yarn tails, flush with your work the way you would normally do it. This does not work well for cotton yarns or silk yarns. Anything that's slippery, it's not a very ideal method, because the knots kind of untie themselves. Not great for rayon, that kind of stuff. So looks like another, here we go, we'll get you in there. So that is the magic knot. Got lots of doorbells going on. How's everyone? So we did the Russian join and we did the magic knot. The next one, we will talk about the spit splice, my favorite. So there's a couple different ways that you can do the spit splice, and I'm going to explain the way I like to do it using Kenzie. So Kenzie is one of my favorite yarns. It's a really awesome yarn that Haiku makes. I'm going to go back to my little second camera. And the first thing that we need to do is, so this is a plied yarn. So it is made of plies. So I'm going to take the this and untwist it so that the plies can be revealed. So you see here are 3 plies of yarn, and you can pull them apart for a while. And I do, usually 3 inches or so seems to work well. Just working these apart. And here are these 3 plies. So this yarn could cut the yarn that you are going to use for spit splicing is going to be a protein fiber, something that felts well. Don't want to use it for a superwash wool. It doesn't really work very well. It needs to be something that will felt. And it looks really good on both the front and the back of the work. There are no ends to weave in. There are no ends that will poke out. It is a fairly secure method of joining the yarns. So I did the first one, and you see how frizzy these edges are. This was a edge of the yarn that was broken apart or pulled apart. Now remember, this is just, it's a number of different fibers, but because it felts, it's that. So this edge, I'm just going to take my scissors and snip so you can see it is a fresh cut. So I just cut this yarn. And now I'm going to untwist and separate these in the same manner that I did before. And so I'm pulling these, and then I will I'll pinch where I've separated them and then let it go. And all the energy from that twist will come out on the ply. So there's 1 ply. There are 2 more on this side. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Separate these folks. They don't always want to come apart, especially because, well, mostly because it's a felty yarn, right? It likes to felt, likes to snuggle up and hang out with itself. So here are those 3 plies. Now, do you see how really clean and crisp these ends are? They're really clean and crisp compared to these edges that have the little poofy, little straggly strands. So when you are spit splicing or joining yarns that are going to be joined by felting, or you're basically felting the fiber together, these edges like this are ideal because they will sort of blend into the rest of the fiber. Okay, so that's why instead of cutting these things, I'm going to actually pull them apart and separate the fiber with my hands instead of with scissors. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So most people would just say, take the 2 yarns, overlap them, wet your hand either with a little water or saliva. Saliva works really well. Put them in the palm of your hand, and some friction, and the friction and heat and creates heat, and the moisture felts the fibers together and it sticks. But that makes a doubly thick section on your work. And if we back up, if you did it that way and you put this piece and this piece together and felted them, if you pulled on it in this direction, there's nothing to keep those 2 fibers from coming apart, right? So that's why we're doing all this other stuff. So here we go. Back to you and back to you. If this were a 4-ply yarn or a 2-ply yarn, then I would remove half of the plies of each of the yarn ends so that I have half of the amount of, I have half the material on one yarn, half of the material on the other yarn. But since I have 3 plies, I am going to remove 1 ply, and I'm just holding on to it, and I'm not holding like right next to my fingers next to each other. I'm backing up just a little bit and giving it a pull, and the fibers just sort of come apart. So remember, yarn's made of wool. Wool is hair, or yarn is made of fibers, and fibers have, what's called a staple length. It's how long the little bits are that are twisted up to make the yarn. So if you pull a little bit farther away, you're able to separate the fibers because you're not holding on to most of the same staples. They will just sort of come apart. So I removed 1 on this sort of greenish color. I'm going to remove 2 on this side. And instead of making them both all the way down at this exact same join, I'm going to pull 1 down here. So there that one goes. You see it left a little poof of stuff. And then I'm going to just move up a pinch more so that they are staggered just a little bit, those two edges, the two like breaks that I just made. Okay. Riveting television, I'm telling you. So now the fun part. You take one of them and you put it, one direction, and then you take this second ply and cross it over the first ply. Then you take the end of the one that's the under and bring this end to wherever you cut the yarn or divided the yarn up to begin with. So it's down to here. And then you do the same thing with this one, which, remember, this was a cut edge. So there's that really sharp edge. I'm going to do the same thing that I did just a minute ago, but I'm just tearing the edge of it off. I'm just pulling the edge off. So this is a nice tapery, fluffy edge. And I will stick that to wherever the beginning of that is. And now I have this lonely, odd one here. So I'm going to sort of line it up as best I can and pull that sharp cut off of there. And it will travel across this join to connect to the yarn over here. So now I have 1, 2, 3 plies on this side, and I have 1, 2, 3 plies on that side. Make sense? Kind of cool, right? Now the fun part, if you don't want to, you don't have to, but if you have not eaten chocolate or drank red wine, you can lick your hand. And you just lick right here, a little bit of spit. In the situation of COVID, it's it's kind of like, but you're putting saliva. You can use water. It works just as well. And I'll do this on the little tiny camera way up high. And I am just adding moisture and felt. I'll do a little bit down here again. So, and when I do this, it's just going to be a little jumpy, but you can kind of see that I'm actually doing something. And you just keep working it until, when I'm doing this, it's heating up the palm of my hand right here. And it is felting the fiber. So that is pretty much what it looks like. And so you notice that the thickness is the same all the way across. And if those were the same color of yarn, you'd never notice that. So when is spit splicing good? It is really good for protein fibers, like I said, things that are going to felt. It looks really good everywhere, front and back of the work. There are no ends, as I said. And it's really good for single ply fibers. So a single is it's a fiber that's just one big fluffy piece, and sometimes it's slightly twisted. You can remove half of the material from one end, half of the material for the other end, and join them in the same method. But this is only ideal for up to about DK weight yarn. Beyond DK weight, when you start into worsted and heavier yarns, it becomes, the felting part makes the fibers, it's a little bit more obvious than I think is good. So I would look at the Russian join, which is the first one that we did for those fibers, even though that fiber would work, even though it would work spit splicing. And what else? Oh, if the yarn is a color changing yarn. So something like Zauberball, for example, Zauberball or Zauberball 100, something like that. If you do a spit splice or a wet splice, you just want to make sure that you do it so that the two ends that you're using are the same color of fiber, so that when you join it, it's a seamless thing. If you have questions at all, you certainly can type them down in the chat. I've got one more awesome join to show you. This one probably takes the most time, but I think it's really fun. So it is called the braided join. And I may not be the best braider in the world, but we're going to do this. So It is going to be I'm using Kobasi Plus, which is cotton, bamboo, silk, and nylon, just a little bit of nylon. And Kobasi Plus is a really great yarn. It's a little bigger weight, and it is twisted up and has lots and lots of plies. So I'm untwisting it. I'm going to go back down to my other little camera right down here. So I've untwisted it, and I'm going to do my best to open this up, and it's a bunch of little plies. You see all those little guys going in there? And so I'll get some of it out, and then I'll tackle some more. And what you want to do for the braided join is divide it into 3 sections. And they don't have to be even or equal sections, but if you can get them equal, that's great. So I'm going to tape this down using tape. That's what you use when you're taping things, right? I'm going to tape this down onto my surface here, and I'm going to take my new yarn, which is right here, and just place it right next to it. I'm going to do 2 things at once, and I'm folding over the edge of my tape so it'll be easy to pick up again. And I am going to, there we go, tape. Ta-da.
Kyle?
Yes.
I don't think we can only see the top part taped. Do we need to see the bottom, or you didn't?
Nope, not yet. Nope.
Got it. Okay.
I'm just taping right up here. These are my,
Okay.
Here are my
That's
edges.
for your braiding. Okay. Just wanted to make sure.
Arts and crafts time, everyone. No, you just need, and I may have made this longer than it needs to be, but I actually think it's kind of fun to do this a little bit longer. And I probably should have untwisted it a little more before I got to here, but that's okay. This is where we are. There it goes. Perfect. So it doesn't really matter which one of these 3 tails you use for, here, I'll move you down just a bit, which one you connect the new yarn to. But what you're going to do is hold one of the braid ends, pieces, whatever, with the new yarn, and then you have 2 other pieces. And the thing about braiding is you always take the one on the outside and bring it to the middle. So outside to the middle, and then you do the opposite with here. And now I've introduced my new yarn. So next is this one, outside to the center, and you create a tight braid. I gotta go slowly so you can see this. And you wanna just keep it nice and tight up, way up close to wherever the last cross was. So things that are really great about this, you can use it for any fiber that's multi-plied. So it needs to be a 3-ply fiber or more, because you see these 3 plies, you need 1, 2, 3 plies to be able to do a braid. It looks really good everywhere, front and back. There are no ends to weave in, although there is a little bit of an end thing to deal with, and you'll see that in just a second. But it does take, tape, or you can put a really heavy book here, or have a friend sit here and hold this for you. It does take a little bit more time, but it is really sturdy. It does not work well for novelty fibers or single ply yarns. So novelty fibers, we would use the magic knot. We talked about that earlier. And for single ply yarns, depending on the fiber, you could bit splice if it's a smaller one. You could do a Russian join if it's a larger weight fiber. This does take a little more time, but not that much more. I mean, I'm doing this super slow and showing you how, even though it's skippy. I know this image is a little skippy. So you could keep going as long as you get 2 inches or so, even more. That should be enough. So we'll just pretend that I've done that much, because I gave you way too much of that. And this third little guy also can be trimmed. Bink. So I will remove my tape. And I do have two ends. One end is the new yarn, and then the other end are these little frayed bits. But this yarn is not going to go anywhere. Is that not the coolest thing ever? It is so cool. So at this point, I would go ahead and work with it. I would knit with it as normal. And then at the very end of the project, as I've mentioned a couple times, I think, at the very end of the project, I would wash and block, however you steam block or wet block or whatever it is that you're going to do. And then at the very end, I would trim those tails. It's not going to go anywhere. And it feels like you need to tie a knot, on these little bits, but you don't need to. It's not going to go anywhere, I promise you. Because also, I mean, you have incorporated those two fibers into each other perfectly. I'm going to open it up to questions. If you have them, you can drop them into the chat. And I see a couple here. I see one person that says, which is best for a sweater? And I will answer all of them. It depends on, the technique that you're doing, as far as, if it's stockinette or if you're doing seed stitch or something and you need to do a knot, you can do a knot. Spit splicing is fantastic. If you're doing something in pieces, ideally we don't want to have any joins, on the garment, but if it's a project that's being worked in the round, it's inevitable to have to add those two, the beginning and end of two balls of yarn together. So choosing which one is the best method is part of what makes your piece uniquely yours. So what else? What would you use for Simply Natural? Gosh, I would probably, I would either spit splice, but Simply Natural, yeah, it would kind of work. It would work.
It felts.
Yeah.
Simply Natural definitely felt. So I think you're right on target there.
It is a little bigger in size than I might want to spit splice. So if I thought about it, which I don't always think about things, sometimes I just do stuff, but if I really thought about it, I would probably use the Russian join if I needed to join the thing. But if it was a thing that was flat, working flat, doing a big blanket or whatever, and I'm using Simply Natural, and I get to the very end, I would leave the really long yarn tail at the end of my row, and then begin with a new hank of yarn, a new ball of yarn at the edge of the row.
Kyle, can you explain what does the thickness have to do when you're spit splicing, since you're reducing the amount of plies anyways?
Yeah, so I can. So when you are wet splicing or spit splicing, felting the fiber itself squishes the fiber and condenses it, right? And it makes it denser. And while doing the method that I've showed you, where you sort of cross and hug the two fibers around each other, it works pretty well pulling the pieces.
You know what? The person actually wrote Simply Worsted, not Simply Natural.
Oh, good. All right.
Big difference. Because one felts and one does not.
And one doesn't. Yeah. So if it felts.
That was my mistake. Sorry.
Yeah, worsted, anything that is worsted, you probably don't want to spit splice in general. DK or smaller, it works really, really well and is fairly invisible. Other than that, it would be a Russian join is what I would do.
Okay, there's a couple more questions. Do you want me to read them to you?
Sure.
Okay, one person, actually Angela asked, when you spit splice, do you have to wait to knit? Do you have to let it dry?
No.
I mean, I never do, but
yeah, I haven't really. So since you're working with a smaller, hi Lily, you're working with a smaller amount of yarn, or thickness of yarn, it shouldn't make that much of a difference. It's not gonna it doesn't affect the integrity of it. Once it's felted, it's felted. So you can go right, continue on with your project. And that's the case with any of these. You can join your yarn and just keep going.
But that brings us to the next question, which is which one of these splices is going to be the best if you're joining another color of yarn, a different color?
Well, it goes back, I think, to what kind of fiber it is, what you're doing, and all of that. So the Russian join is a super secure way to connect those two yarns and have a very clean break between color A and color B. Spit splicing works really well if it is a even number of plies. So, where's my little example? Here we go. For my spit splicing, I have that little, I don't think you can see it, that weird little green yarn that's going up into this other color. So instead of carrying that one yarn all the way across to intersect where the other join is, you could tear both of them pretty much at the same point and just have the odd ply just meet itself in the middle. So, I mean, just think about it. You could figure out a way to make it work for the color change. So spit splicing would work. Braided join, probably not a good idea for changing to color A to color B, because you see the braid very obviously. The magic knot would work. There is a knot. So all of them really, I think, except braided join. Other questions?
Anything that you'd recommend in particular for acrylics?
For acrylics, so the Russian join is ideal for acrylic because you can take your needle and sew up one side, go through the loop and do the same thing, and it makes a very, very sturdy, secure join. Some acrylics can be sort of slippery, I think, so I don't know that knotting would be ideal. So I probably would use the Russian join using the little needle, and you can find sharper large-eyed needles. I just used one of our tapestry needles for this one. So my goodness, so many good questions too, which is fun.
Yeah, there was I think actually, well, one person asked, Nora wanted to know how many stitches she should leave unworked at the end of a row to join, but that is also sort of dependent on many factors.
How many stitches to leave unworked at the end of a row to join? I don't think I understand the question.
Well, I think she's trying to do a color switch at the end of the row, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. Or is that what you're thinking, Nora? Or otherwise, I don't think it matters. But is that, is Nora still here? And if she is, can she unmute herself?
Well, I think one thing, at the end, perfect. So if we're doing a color change, Nora, at the very end of the row, what I would suggest is, you're getting ready to work your new color. Go ahead and knit 5 or 10 stitches and use a little tiny, like a removable stitch marker, something to kind of stab through the yarn where you started the new row. Yeah, so you know where that is, and you can knit, an inch or so of unknit an inch or so of stitches. So you're backing up you're not done with that old color anymore. So you knit to the end of the row, put your little marker so you know where on the yarn that is, and then tink back like 2 inches or so. So there's this much yarn to get to the end, and right where that removable stitch marker is, where you've stabbed it through your fiber, that's the point that you need the 2 yarns to wrap around each other. Then you could do the Russian join, right? Get that little thing right there. Off you go.
But what happens when the yarn is like a DK weight and you're doing a Russian join? Do you have to use a tinier needle?
You could probably use, there are sewing needles that have larger eyes. So you could do that. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
One more question. I think this was interesting. I know what I would do, but I don't know if it's the right thing. Um, uh, Sea clog. I'm not sure what the real name is. How do I join roving types of wool? So I'm taking it, she's thinking of the single plies that are
Yeah.
almost just like roving, that are lightly twisted type of thing.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it sounds like something that is a lightly felted single. So it would depend, again, how thick the fiber is. So if it's a DK weight or larger, I would probably do a Russian join, even though it felts. If it's DK weight or smaller-ish, I would probably spit splice it. But the fun thing about all this is you could do whatever you want. This is your project. You can do whatever you want, whatever you think is going to work the best. So it is important, I think, to sort of test out these things. And here comes the, Lily, get down. Here comes the information that's very exciting. We get the opportunity to practice all of our stitches. We get to practice our finishing by doing a swatch. So working a little tiny piece of fabric, 4 or 6 inch square. Usually we do a 6 inch so we can measure a 4 inch amount. You can sort out all of the, check all the instructions. If you're not quite sure about, neck shaping or something, you can play with that after you've done your square. You can test it for color fastness by putting it in, water, check to see whatever wool wash you might be using. You can also check the different kinds of joins that you might want to use between the different yarns. So you can break your yarn, rejoin it using the braided join, or break it and rejoin it using the Russian join. See what it looks like. So
do we know? Oops. Do we know the heritage or the history behind why they call it a Russian join?
I don't know. It is sort of, that's just what it's called.
Yep.
Probably comes from a person who was from Russia who, someone learned it from, and then off we went. Very much like locked floats, we call Armenian knitting, because the people who, Elsa Schiaparelli, I can't say her name right, but I love her. But the design house that made the bow front sweater, the people who made the samples were from Armenia. So we call it Armenian knitting, even though there's all these different cultures who do a similar method. So don't know.
Excellent. And the handout, you're going to be sending that. Could you repeat the handout in the video?
Absolutely. So, so we are recording this. If it works really well, which I believe it is going to, we will post it up on our YouTube channel and into our blog. We will be linking the handouts which are being laid out right now. So I did a whole series of photo tutorials for each of these techniques. We will have those. They'll be on our website, and I will send an email to everyone who signed up for this event so that you have the chance to download those handouts as well. Yeah. Any other questions, folks? If not, I think we did it.
I think we did.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you. Yeah, I want to thank you for taking time to hang out with us. I do also encourage you to check out our newsletter if you haven't signed up for it. We have another one coming out tomorrow, and it is really important that when you do get our newsletter, that you open it as soon as you can and check the deals and things, because sometimes there's limited quantities of items at a really good deal. Also, there are a number of other free events that are coming up, including a really awesome one with Karin. She will be in front of the camera talking to us about art felt, and she's going to do a 1-hour demo. All you have to do is hang out and watch, see how cool the process is. And then we will have a number of classes, most likely, where if you're interested in learning some more tips about the techniques that are used in that, you'll be able to sign up and take some classes, which is cool. I have another free workshop. We have paid ones as well. If you'd like to buy one, that would be awesome too. But we have another free one coming up in a couple weeks for those people who are not familiar with knitting charts. So if you're unfamiliar with learning how to read knitting charts for lace or color work, that kind of thing, it will be another very similar to this online event, and there are 2 sessions for that, and it is free as well. So have a wonderful night, or well, it is night, I guess, everywhere at this point. So want to say thank you for hanging out, and I guess that's it. Yeah.